Welcome all. I wanted to discuss today a topic about humans controlling animals, and I'll explain what I mean. Agiret, we understand that humans are allowed to eat animals. In the end of after Noach came out of the Teva, permission was granted to humans to eat animals, and the Torah is replete with dinim that apply to when humans want to eat animals. Kisesava lachal basar, how to handle it, the mitzvahs of kisei adam, of shchita, the isurim of certain parts of the animal, and like the Gemara in Chulin and Daf Pedalet elaborates on, clearly it's permitted for human beings to eat animal flesh when they want to. It's something that's healthy for them. There's many chazals that mention that it's healthy for humans to eat animal proteins, maybe not to the point of overconsumption, maybe not too much, and there's limitations, but clearly human beings are allowed to consume animals when it's for their need. Additionally, we understand that humans are allowed to harness the brute force of animals to put them to work. For example, you're allowed to have a cow or a donkey or a horse and use it whatever tzarich you need, be it to plow or to pull a cart or push a cart or whatever it is. And this again we know because the Torah is replete with pratei dinim about how a human being is supposed to treat his animal employees. And based on that, we clearly see that the Torah allowed humans to use animals for consumption and to use them for labor and etc. Now, the Hadlarai that I want to discuss today in regards to the human-animal interaction is a little bit more abstract. In the end of Parshas Noach, towards the end of Parshas Noach, the pasuk tells, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Noach when he comes out of the Teva, HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises Noach, and he says, "Meirachem v'chitchem yeh al kol chayes haaretz, al kol ha'if hashemayim." Your fear and your power will be imposed on all the beasts of the earth, the animals of the earth, and the beasts and the land animals and the birds. They'll all be afraid and they'll be zugestellt to humans. Now, Stam, in the time of slavery, I believe that certain Christian slave owners who were grappling with the legitimacy of owning slaves interpreted this pasuk to mean that they're allowed to own slaves. The fear of humankind, meaning the white man, will be imposed on all the subhumans that they were taking into slavery. Obviously, that's not a true reading of the pasuk, but that was a reading of the pasuk. Now, in any case, what's being said over here is that animals are afraid of humans, and oftentimes, even very large animals will run from humans, will avoid humans, and animals are afraid of humans. But Lamaisa, most humans are afraid of animals. If we were to be trapped in a lion's cage, alone with the lion, I venture to say most of us would be much more afraid of the lion than the lion would be afraid of us. So what happened to this? What is this haftacha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives? What is the meaning of this, and to what level does it extend? So now I want to talk about it in this context a little bit. There's a netziv, the netziv in the Hakdama to She'iltis, in the beginning of his sefer on the She'iltis, in Ois Gimel and the Hakdama over there, the netziv writes an interesting thing. And I want to elaborate this a little bit. He says, "Yedua mikama sipurim." It's known to us from many stories. Tzadikim nitzlu afilu b'hiyaisim levad. Tzadikim were saved from wild animals, even when they were alone. This is what the Netziv says. Now I want to talk about some of those stories that the Netziv is making mention of, and some of the concepts of animals fearing humans. Now the primary source to discuss this from would be the Psukim in Daniel. But before we talk about the Psukim in Daniel, I just want to share a Gemara in Shabbos. The Gemara in Shabbos, in Daf Kufnan Aleph from Beis, brings this pasuk and addresses, so to speak, this glaring problem that l'chayr humans are afraid of animals. The Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Kufnan Aleph from Beis, brings this file. It says, "U'merechem v'chitchem yeh al yeh, kol zman she'adam chai eimasu mitel asal brius." As long as a person is alive, his fear is imposed on the brius. Kivin shemeis, once a person is dead, batlei masa, the animals don't fear him anymore. Amar Papa says, "Naktinon, we hold Aryeh abei trei le'nafel." A lion will not attack two humans. And then the Gemara continues on that a little bit, and then the Gemara says as follows. But what is it sometimes that you see that animals are not afraid of humans? So the Gemara says animals are only afraid of humans who maintain their humanity. But should a human somehow lose his humanity, like as follows, the Gemara brings down as follows: Kidirami baraba, damar Rabbi baraba, ein chaya shalatas ba'adam ad shenidma like a behema. a chaya does not impose its will and is not shaylet on humans unless the human appears to him like a behemoth. Shenamar adam biyikar baltalin nimshul kebehemoth nidmo. So this is the Gemara in Shabbos that, so to speak, lays the groundwork of this idea, of this theme, that we're saying, that the pasuk was maftiach to Noach and to all humanity, that animals would fear humans, and that humans would be the dominant force, and animals are subservient, is only kol kama humans maintain their humanity and their dignity. But if humans begin to slip and don't maintain their humanity and their dignity, then animals fear them not anymore. So now, and this is what the Netziv is making reference to, when the Netziv says, we heard many stories of different tzaddikim and gedolim who animals were afraid of them. The Netziv also is taking care to mention this point, that it is not a davar pashit, that all humans, no matter in what context or what stage or whatever they're up to in their life, an animal will fear them. Humans in a pristine stage are something that animals fear. So now, to flesh this out a little bit, I want to share the Psukim in Daniel in Parak Vav. Now, Daniel found himself in the king's house, and he was a very high minister of the king Daryavish, in the tkufa between the two Beis Hamikdashes. You know, in the tkufa between the Chorban Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni, Daniel is alive then, and Daniel is the servant of Daryavish. Now, the Psukim in Parak Vav it's come out a whole parak that goes into the story. It says that Daryavish HaMelech Hamadi became the king when he was 66 years old, and he really, in some sort of move to democracy, it says Daryavish appointed a council of 120 members who would be like his Congress, his Senate, some sort of form of representative government that Daryavish was going to work with. And on top of them, he put like 3 senior ministers, and Daniel was one of them. Now, over time, Daniel was exerting his power over this body of government, and they became jealous of him, and they wanted to set him up for failure. So this government body, this 120 people, these congressmen, these senators, they thought of an idea. They said as follows. They came to the king and they gave him an idea. They said, why don't you pass a law that anybody who asks a request or becomes a supplicant of any other king will be thrown into the lion's den, meaning, i.e. subject to the death penalty. And the Melech thought this to be a nice idea. It seems like something that would protect his power, that would consolidate his power, meaning if you have any questions or you have any advice or supplications, you have to come to him, the king. That's sounded right to him. So the Yavish signs on to this. Now it says, V'Daniel, Kidei Yada di Rashim Ksav al Levesa, Daniel, who was aware of this law, he went home to his house, and the pasuk says, V'chavein pesichas lei, b'ilasa neged Yerushalayim. He had windows in his attic that faced Yerushalayim. V'zimnin tlasa b'yoyim hibarach al berchui, u'matzlo moide kadam elaha kol kaval dihava. He 3 times a day, Daniel would bow on his knees, and he would daven towards Yerushalayim, facing Yerushalayim, and daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, avad min kadmas tano, like he always did. Now, from these psukim in Daniel that talk about Daniel's tefillas to 3 times a day, the Gemaras and Brachas and the Lamed Aleph and the Lamed Daled learn various dinim, halacha l'maisa takeaways based on Daniel. So this is a very consequential psukim. The Gemara over there learns that La'ilam Yispal Adam B'Bayis Sheish L'Chaloines, or the Gemara learns the pratim of how to do Kriyas V'Shtachavayis. So this is Daniel's tefillas. Now, what happens is the people who had set Daniel up, they gathered and they catch Daniel in the act, davening in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They come to the king and they say, we caught Daniel supplicating, the davening and asking from another king. Now the king over here is in a tight spot. The king loved Daniel. He did not want to harm Daniel, and this was clearly not the intention of what he wanted. So when the Melech hears this, that Daniel was caught, he tries to think of a way that he could save Daniel. And the Psukim say that until nightfall, the Ad Male Shimsha have a Mishtadir Lahatzaluse. The Psukim go into great description over here that until nightfall, the Melech, Daryavish himself, was trying to figure out a way that he could suggest that Daniel did not violate his halachas. And the Midrashim give us the various different rationales that the Melech Daryavish advanced to try to save Daniel from the lion's den. Now, eventually, his government body, the lower portion of the government, these 120 Chachamim, tire with him, they frustrate him, they said, if you're the king, you're the king, if you're not the king, you're not the king, which the Midrashim explained to us they told him, if you're not holding by enforcing the laws of the land, then you won't be the king. We'll remove you from the kingship. So the Melech turns to Daniel and he says, will your will your Hashem save you? And it's the Melech is very, very frightful. Then they take Daniel to the lion's den. They place him inside of a lion's den. They cover it over with a stone, and it says the Melech Eidan Azul Malka Lehechale. The Melech went home to his castle, his palace. Bas Tavis V'Dachan Lehinel Kadmui. He didn't eat anything, and he had a very, very troubled sleep. The Melech was clearly very, very concerned with the fate of Daniel. It says Be'edan Malka B'Shafarava. When he got up in the morning, the Melech gets up at Bahala and he goes running to the lion's den. As he gets close to it, he starts calling out in a loud, broken voice. And he says, Daniel, did your Hashem save you? Are you still alive? The Melech is really troubled by this. And when he gets closer, he's calling out until finally Daniel answers him and he says, yes, I'm here, the Yechia Melech. I pledge my allegiance to you. And he says, my Hashem sent Malachim, and they closed the mouths of the lion, and they didn't harm me, they didn't touch me, nothing happened to me at all. So this is the first, so to speak, the most primary story of a human being faced with, hungry lions in close confinement, in a method that was clearly meant to lead to his death. And Daniel, because he was Adam B'Yikar, because he was a person who was a person, the lions were fearful of him and they stayed away from him. Now, I want to read the Lashon from the Zohar, where it describes the story of Daniel, because it gives it a lot much more flavor than what we're just seeing from the Gemara and Shabbos. The Zohar says as follows. The Zohar is in Parshas Vayeshev, and it says as follows: Tachazi, come and see, Kama Islam lebnei Nasha la'ashkecha b'pulchana d'Kodesh Brichu. How careful a person has to be about the davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Cholman d'ishtadel b'iraisel b'pulchana d'Kodesh Baruch Hu. Anybody who makes it his concern to be orangutan in his davening and his learning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the chilase ve'emse hu al kala. His fear and his stature will be imposed on all the animals in the world. And here the Zohar gives another layer of depth to this. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, Avad kol briyan da'alma kol chad v'chad b'diyoknik kedekachazile. He, so to speak, showed each creature in the world the diyukin of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the face of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as they were created. Ulebasar, and after this, bara lebarnash b'diyoknei ilah. And then after this, later on, after HaKadosh Baruch Hu finished creating all the animals, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created mankind in the Tzelem Elokim. V'shalte al kula b'diyok nadan. With this countenance, with the fact that humans are b'Tzelem Elokim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he made humans reign over all the animals. The cholzman de barnash kohen ba'alma kol inun briyan da'alma zekifin reishe. Mustaklim b'diyokni lo de barnash. They look at the face, which is resemblant, which reminds them of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's face. Kedein kule dachol v'zon mikamei, and they become all fearful of the human. Meaning the animals look at the human's face, and in it they see some sort of mascaris of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's face, kaviyachol, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed them when He created them. And he says, Kedahu d'chsiv, that's what it means when it says, when a person maintains his purity and his tzelem elikim looks the way it was supposed to look, and the Zohar continues, it says, Daniel lo yishtani diyukne, his face never changed. So therefore, when the lions looked at him, they saw HaKadosh Baruch Hu and they became terribly fearful. But, a person who's nimshal kebehema, like the Gemara in Shabbos says, who does not look anymore like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, will not have this privilege anymore of being able to have the animals be fearful of him. Now, there's many, many more midrashim of this story of Daniel. It happened on Pesach. Daniel, it seems, had a seder in the Geva Arayos, and he had some visitors. But we'll save that for a different date. That's not for today. Today I wanted to share a few more modern day occurrences of this theme, that one who maintains his countenance and who stays at tzaddik, the animals fear him. Now, the most famous story of this variety, l'chayr, is the story with the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh. There's a famous story that's told about the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh. The Chidah brings it down in Shem HaGedolim. Others seem to feel that it didn't happen with the Ohr HaChaim, it happened with the Ohr HaChaim's grandfather, Rabbi Avram ibn Attar. But Yiach Shia, it didn't happen to the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh himself or to a relative of his, where the story was told. We'll say it about the Ohr HaChaim because that's the way it was famous. The Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh was a tailor in Sali, which is a city in Morocco, where he lived before he made emigration to Eretz Yisrael. And the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh, who was nafshe chashke b'Torah, who didn't want to spend too much time tailoring, his minig was he would open his shop to do some tailoring work. He would work whatever was needed to have his parnasa for the day, and then he would close up his shop. He wouldn't do any extra work. Now it seems the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh was an excellent tailor, someone who was able to do a great job, and it came to the attention of the caliph that the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh was a great tailor, and when it came time for the caliph to make a wedding, he sent his Mesharsim to the Ohr HaChaim, and he asked them to have the Ohr HaChaim be the tailor who makes some of the regal clothing for the wedding. Now the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh, who was not willing to change his Mahalach HaChaim over here, and did not want to give up all his time from learning to tailor for the king, said, I'm sorry, I'm not the man for the job. You need someone who could dedicate weeks of time to this straight. I work very piecemeal. I do only a little bit of work at a time, and then I'm done. I'm not the right man for the job. To which the Melech's attendant said, this is not a choice. This is something you have to do. The Ohr HaChaim stood his ground. He said, I'm not doing this. This is not what I do. And ultimately, the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh was told that if he doesn't back down, or he's going to be sentenced to death. The Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh doesn't back down, and they take the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh to a lion's den, very similar and reminiscent of Daniel. And they put him in the lion's den, a hungry lion's den, and they cover it over and they leave it for the night. They come in the morning, and they see the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh sitting in the corner of the lion's den with a little Tehillim in his hand, saying Tehillim while a bunch of docile lions sit around in a circle and then wag their tails at the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh. Now, in one way or another, this is a story that's very, very reminiscent of the story of Daniel, and this is a much more modern day story. There's also stories told about the great Chassidish rabbis that when they went to the zoo, or the stories told about the Rechaim, or Sam the Shineva, Shlomo Karliner. There's many stories along this vein of different rabbis who interacted with animals who were super dangerous, and were able to the animals were afraid of them instead of vice versa, because they were people who maintained their Tzelem Elokim in a way that forced the animals to be afraid of them. Now there's another story, interesting story along this line. I don't know the name that's attached to it, but there's a story about a family in Vilna that hired. They were a wealthy family, and they wanted to have good security around their premises, and they bought a bunch of guard dogs, vicious dogs, and they surrounded their property with these vicious guard dogs. And it's late one night, and they get a knock on their door, and they're terrified, because how could someone be knocking on the door? How could you get through the perimeter with all the guard dogs? They timidly open the door, and they see standing there, I don't know who it's told about, one of the Rabbanim of Vilna, one of the great Rabbanim of Vilna. And they ask him, well, what happened to the dogs? How'd you get through over here? And he says, dogs? What dogs? I'm here collecting Pidyon Shvuyin, and I walked through the gate, and I came right here, and they see all the dogs sitting calmly in the driveway, not doing a thing. I think, if I remember correctly, the story was said about Elazar Moshe Horowitz, who was the Rav of Pinsk, not Vilna. His Hagayos are in the back of the Shas. I believe this is a story that said about Elazar Moshe Horowitz. I don't remember exactly where I saw it, but this is a story that's told about many different Gedolei Olim, and this is the embodiment of Meirachem v'Chitchem Yiach Kol Chayis Haaretz for someone who maintains their Tzelem Elokim. Now, it's interesting, this din, so to speak, this concept that animals are supposed to fear humans and not vice versa, even Shtel Zechais Halacha L'Maisa. The Mishnah in the third parak of Tainus says that if animals are attacking humans, we're machras a Tainus on it right away because it's a Shas Tzara. And which the Gemara on Daf Chav Beis Amud Aleph and Tainus goes into an arichastic discussion about what type of attacks are we talking about, how many animals are attacking, how many humans, what's the proximity that they live to the city. Because there's a premise that underlies this whole sugya, is that it is unnatural for the animals to attack the humans. The animals are supposed to be afraid of the humans. If the animals are attacking the humans, it's clearly meant to show a message that humans are not doing what they're supposed to. But it has to be that you're not mamish walking into their den. You're not mamish, rating them on. So the Gemara in Tainus has a whole discussion of how to quantify these animal attacks that we're talking about that are considered abnormal and unnatural. But in any case, and this is paskin like this in the Rambam in Hilchos Tainus and the Shulchan Aruch in Hilchos Tainus, animal attacks are considered a siman min hashamayim that the city or the town or that Klal Yisrael is not doing well. Which means that this din of Meirachem v'Chitchem is a psak, that be'etzem, that's supposed to be the status quo. The status quo is supposed to be that Meirachem v'Chitchem Yiach Kol Chayis Haaretz, and when that's not happening in that manner, and that's That's something aberrant. Now, there's a few more nakudas of this idea of mankind's domination of the animal world that I want to discuss. And another one is like this. There's a shaila in some of the paiskim. There's not a ton of literature on this, but there's a shaila in some of the paiskim. Is it okay for Jewish people, for frum people, to own pets? There's a tshuva in the Farkasa Da'anya from Reb David Sparber. He has a tshuva. It's in tshuva Kuf Samach Gimel. He says as follows. The shaila that was asked him as follows. B'dvar sheilascha b'sheichet u'beidik echad. There was a sheichet Yirei Shemayim u'muchzik b'kashrus b'chol mili. An upstanding Jew by all accounts. Aval achas huloi shaloi yasher beinov. There's one thing about the sheichet that seems to be not okay or not right, and that is shematza bebeisei shevechem efrechem. He has a bird cage with a bunch of decorative birds, beautiful birds. When they asked him, what is this that you have? He doesn't think there's anything aser about this. If somebody, a Rav or a Meir will tell him that it's not allowed for him to have this, in Benigla and Minister, whether it's a Benigla or a Nister reason, whatever it is, he's asking him to return to take them out of his house. Now, the tshuva goes on to say that this doesn't ruin his chazaka, and he's still a trustworthy sheikh based on this. But Reb David Sfarber does conclude over here that he brings rayas from the Sefer Hasidim and other places that owning animals, just for your viewing pleasure, he seems to feel would not be okay. It's some sort of tzar b'lachayim or some sort of pisoid, not good to have. And meaning the level of human domination over the animal kingdom, according to this tshuva, would not extend to the point of being able to have a pet. Now, there's an interesting story that's relevant to this discussion. There's a story that's told, and I don't know if it's true or not, but it's brought down in one of the earliest biographies on Rav Zusha Me'anipoli, the Rebbe of Meilach's brother and traveling companion. Rav Zusha Me'anipoli was once traveling around raising money for a Pidyon Shvuyin situation. He was going house to house and he was trying to raise money. He came upon a certain Gvir's house, and he was invited in, and the secretary told him that he should make himself comfortable in the waiting room, and the Gvir will be ready for him shortly. While sitting in the waiting room, the Rav Zusha notices that there's a bird cage in the corner, filled with beautiful birds, and he notices a certain interesting habit that the birds have. He says they're sitting there's bars on the cage, and the birds will every now and then poke their head between the slats of the bars, and then they bring their head back in, they chirp a little more, they go to another spot, they poke their head out, they chirp a little more. And the way Rav Zusha visualized this, he said, this looks to me like these birds are pasha trapped. They're desperate to escape their captivity over here, and they just keep trying relentlessly again and again. Each potential crack in the wall, maybe this is how I could escape, maybe this is how I could escape. So Rav Zusha says, I looked at myself and I say, I'm here, I'm collecting for Pidyon Shvuyin, for someone who's in captivity. And right now in front of me, I have birds who are in captivity. How could I let them stay here? He opened the bird cage, and he promptly freed all this Gvir's birds to go on their way. Now, suffice to say, Rav Zusha did not receive a check from this Gvir. But Al Kapanim, you see from the story of Rav Zusha, that Rav Zusha also seemed to be of this mind, of this vein, that, humans should not have pets for their entertainment, for just their enjoyment. That seems to be a bridge too far in humans dominating the animal kingdom. Now, Lamaisa, one could ask, forget about the Gvir not giving Rav Zusha a check. Does Rav Zusha owe the Gvir a check? I mean, you can't free somebody else's animals or pets or whatever. And I did see a few chuvas here and there that discuss, a little bit slightly tongue-in-cheek, if Rav Zusha owes money, meaning we don't even know if the story ever happened to know if he owes the money, but if the story ever happened, would Rav Zusha owe the money? And there's a discussion about stopping someone from doing an Aveira. There's a sugya, the Gemara in Ksubis, it's a bakant to the Gemara. The Gemara says that in the mitzvah sasei, you could beat someone to do the mitzvah. Now there's a machlekes, the K'tzais and Asivis, if this is every person could force their friend to do a mitzvah or to stop them from doing an Aveira, or is it only Bezdin, and what about financial forcing instead of physical forcing? And there's a whole discussion, based on that, to what extent could you damage someone or could you harm them financially to prevent them from doing an Aveira. So there's a few steps over here that are a little schwer, because first we have to figure out what Aveira it would be to have a bird. I mean, even if it's not the proper thing, or Al Pi Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, it's not, it could cause damage to your household, but from there to Aveira might be still a stretch, and even if it is an Aveira, what exactly is the level of intervention that one person's allowed to have in another person's Aveiris when it comes to being mazik them with money? So, but it's a tongue-in-cheek shayla that I'm not going to get too deeply involved in. another famous Nakuda that's part of the discussion is the Nadi Behuda's famous tshuva about hunting. The Nadi Behuda in Yeredeya, Tinyana, Tshuva Yud, and it's a fascinating tshuva. Nadi Behuda goes through the inyan of hunting for entertainment. It's a letter that he got from someone named Reb Gottfried Oppenheim, who wrote to him. He was obviously a wealthy person. Who wrote to him, where's the Torah standpoint on going hunting? And over here, this has less to do per se with the Nadi Behuda attempts a few different things. The Nadi Behuda first starts talking about it from a context of tzar b'lachayim, and a context of putting yourself in danger by going out and hunting animals in the forest in a dangerous environment, and creating a conflict with the animals who could also harm you if you're threatening them. He also talks about stam baltashlis, wastefulness, because these are not animals that you could eat. So what are you doing with these whole animals? So the Nadi Behuda talks about all these different various rationales. None of them are strong enough to answer with it, but Tzim Seif, the Nadi Behuda, seems to really circle in on this idea that it's just not Yiddish, which again is similar to the pet owning. Meaning, even though Merechem v'chitchem and animals are subservient to humans, that's when it comes for eating them, for using them for work. But just to interact with them, to hunt them, to own them, just for pleasure, the Nadi Behuda seems to feel is not Yiddish. He says the only hunters, term ish tzayed that we find, by in the Torah, I'll read you. He says, "Va'amna ma'oidani tama al guf hadavar." He says, I'm very suspect about this entire issue. He says, "Lemetzino ish tzayed." You only find the concept of an ish tzayed rak ben Nimrod be'esav. Ve'ein ze darki ben Avram Yitzchak Yaakov. This is not the way of the children of Avram Yitzchak and Yaakov. Upok chazi loymar tivalav v'techadash. He says, this is not what we do. Rachmav kol ma'asav, and a yid is not supposed to be doing this. And he so to speak adds on as a tack on the tzar b'lachayim and batashlis and etc. But be'etzem what he's saying is that there's just no makom to hunt animals for no reason. He feels like it's not Yiddish. Now he also in this tshuva says something interesting, that he has an interesting discussion over here about what level, to what extent is a person allowed to put himself in danger in order to bring himself a parnasa. Stam interesting aside point from this tshuva, but in any case, this is another interesting tshuva that's related to this concept of mankind's domination of the animal kingdom. Now there is one more another Nakuda in this Nadi Behuda that I think I've shared in the past one time. This is something I heard from my father that I think is a very beautiful Nakuda that's worth sharing over here. The Nadi Behuda, when he's talking about the Inyan Musar over here of not hunting, he goes off on a little bit of a tangent, and he says, "Avalirdef hachareim biyaris, makom meinasan," to chase animals in the forest where they live, kishein regilun lavali yishav, when they are no threat to humankind. Ein kan mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah at all. Ve'en kan rak lirdef hacher taivas liboy. It's just chasing after the taivas that a person has. Ve'etzes hanidme ketavya, and the etzes that appear like a deer. Umishu ish atzarach l'zer parnasase, and then he continues off onto the parnasa piece. So Nadi Behuda writes, like, it's just atzasa yetzer, this is atzasa taiva, and a person shouldn't chase the animals in this facet. Now, my father once pointed out that there's an interesting thing in this Nadi Behuda. The Nadi Behuda said that the only people who we find are considered, ish tzayed in the Torah is Esav and Nimrod. Now, the problem is that there's a Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara in Sanhedrin in the Tzadik Hey talks about David HaMelech, about the einish that David HaMelech was going to give. And it says that David HaMelech, on the Tzadik Hey and Aleph, the Gemara says that David HaMelech was once out hunting. Yom Echad Nafak Lischler Bazi. He went out to hunt. Asa Satan, the Satan came, Ve'idmele Ketavya, appeared to him like a deer. Pasek Begira, he shot an arrow at Vlematye. He didn't reach it, he missed it. Mashche, so he chased it, Ad Amte, Eretz Plishtim, until David HaMelech went to the Eretz Plishtim. Chazi Yishbi, when Yishbi saw him, Benoiv Amar, Hainu Hai the Katlu Legali Asachi. So Kafse, he captured him, he tied him up, he brought him, and how David HaMelech got saved is a nace. Now, in any case, you seemingly see from that Gemara in Sanhedrin that David HaMelech was out hunting, without any particular reason. And the Nadi Yehuda neglects to quote this Gemara at all. He doesn't bring this Gemara b'chlal. There exists a Gemara that seems to imply that David HaMelech was a hunter. Now, the interesting point there is as follows. If you notice in the Nadi Yehuda's words, the Nadi Yehuda said when he's trying to describe that it's Atzas HaYetzer, that a person should stay away from, he says all this is over here is Lirdef Acher Taivas Liboy, the Eitzes HaNidme Ketavya, and Eitzes that appear like a deer. Now, if you'll search, the Yetzer Hara is never referred to as Hanidme Ketavya, except for this one location. In this Gemara in Sanhedrin, and the Tzadik is the only place that the Yetzer Hara is referred to as Nidme Ketavya. So seemingly the Nadi Yehuda, Berev Chachmasai, was in one line alluding to the fact that yes, I'm aware of the Gemara in Sanhedrin that suggests that David HaMelech was a hunter, and Me'ezatam Shia, I don't hold it shver, either because David HaMelech was a king, or because David HaMelech was hunting for a specific reason, or maybe this was all part of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu being Mesaviv to lead to the Einish. But in any case, the Nadi Yehuda is clearly, or seemingly making mention of the fact that he's aware of this Gemara in Sanhedrin. Okay, Shkoyach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.